Well, hello.
Hello, everybody. Episode 207. So that one matters. We have big news to announce about autism and things like this, but I'm not going to jinx it because it's in the process of happening. So we'll talk about it in the next few months. But things are moving on that front in a way that interests me very much so.
Very exciting.
Yeah. So I decided to do a podcast about autism because, and to explain, I'm going to say what I think it is, and I'm right. Anyway, I am.
I love your confidence.
No, it's not confidence. I always know when I'm right. That's not confidence. It's not. I'm not confident about it. It's the patterns fit. So on that one you can take to the bank. Anyway, so let's talk about autism.
Right.
So if you look at the DSM-5, you're going to see ASD, so Autism Spectrum Disorder, as a disability. It is true that if you take autism far enough, you're going to get someone who has a low functionality in society. That's what they call a disability. Now, you can take any of that and turn it into a disability. Women are more agreeable than men. If you take agreeability to the max, you will end up with a disability as well. If you take disagreeability, which can be very beneficial, it can be very functional or dysfunctional, you take it to a max, you end up with a disability. So the idea of saying that autism is ASD and is a disability because you just got a few screw loose in your brain is a very uneducated thing to say. You have to be dumb as shit to say that, basically. So because otherwise, how are you going to explain the amount of things that autistic people can do? For example, and I'm not, if we talk about long-functioning people, but also high-functioning autistic people, which for the longest time were not recognized as such. I'm one of them, by the way. I function just fine in society, right?
Do you?
I do. You don't know all of it, but if we do that podcast together, you will.
No, you don't. You don't function well in society.
I do function well in society.
You do function well in society.
But an Isaac Newton was seen as someone with Asperger. So again, autism is not that simple. So then he brings the question, what if it's not a disability? Again, they're not saying autism is a disability, they're saying ASD is. But again, you can take anything and push it far enough and it'll turn into a disability anyway. So my point is I want to define what autism is. Right, so what if it's a function? What if it's actually not a disease, but rather a function? So what function would that be? If it is a function, it has its opposite, always. If you look, anxiety has its opposite, so anything with a function has its opposite. Hunger.
So what would be the opposite of autism?
Right, so that's what I want to bring about. There's something called the Imprinted Brain Theory, and I'm going to explain what that is. The problem with that theory is it has a few kinks. It has a few things that just don't work out well, and I'm going to fix them and advance a theory that goes in the direction of the Imprinted Brain Theory that I like a lot, but push it further into what I believe is the correct field. So the Imprinted Brain Theory was the idea that on one side you have ASD on the far end, and on the far end on the other side you have schizophrenia. So that you have autism spectrum on one side, schizoid behavior on the other. And everything is a dial between the two. The reason whether you go on one side or the other is you find it very interesting, is an epigenetic thing. Do you know the difference between genetic and epigenetic? No. So, and most people do not. Genetic is what is encoded into your DNA. Just because you have a gene doesn't mean it's being expressed. Right. Expression of that gene is decided by your environment. That's what epigenetic is. So you can have a gene for something, but your environment does not require you to access it. So therefore, it will lay dormant. I'm oversimplifying, but you get the idea. So nutrition can bring forward certain things because then you have an expression of a gene that is already there. So if you lack the gene, you can never express it. But just because you have the gene doesn't mean you will express it. That's epigenetics. So epigenetics is a massively important aspect. This is, remember the flatworm? That a head and a tail, that's epigenetics. It's an expression of genetics that we do not fully understand. They say 90% of DNA is junk DNA. No, it's not. We're just not understanding it. Most likely that 90% goes toward epigenetics. So it's a very, very important part.
So they're basically possibilities.
Yes. So you are born with a set of possibilities and your environment will choose which one you will express. Again, I'm oversimplifying, but you get the idea.
Oversimplifying,
Right.
of
Right.
course,
So
yeah.
the imprinted brain theory is an epigenetic of a certain set of genes. Which set of genes is that? Is a paternal versus maternal expression.
What is that?
It's a masculine versus feminine side. So that autism is a overexpression of the paternal side, so the Y chromosome. Whereas schizoid behavior is an overexpression of the double X chromosome through epigenetics.
Whoa.
Interesting. I know. So interesting. So that would
That's so.
So
wow. Okay.
what do autistic people do? They do stuff. They're very mechanistic. They play games. They
Very
do
on the
things.
observation side of things,
Oh no,
right?
we're gonna get to that.
Oh.
But they do stuff. Whereas what do schizoid people? They live in their head. So if you push that, you have someone who's all action versus someone who's all thought. That's the masculine versus the feminine side. Right, so that's very interesting. Yeah, I know. So you could see how also nutrition has a tendency to influence certain behavior. So that would mean that autism leans toward that XY, whereas schizoid behavior goes toward that double X. What's very interesting about that is we saw that the imprinted brain theory was pushing toward, for example, the promiscuity versus, single mates and stuff like that. So multitasking versus, single tasking was the same idea. So if you were to push toward the schizoid behavior, you see people that are very promiscuous. So on the feminine side, they're very promiscuous because it is a required trait of personality in case your mate would die often. Then you need to be able to go to the next one. If you live in a society 1200 years ago where there's about 17 predators trying to kill you, the chances that your mate, the man who goes hunt every day and goes to war often, won't make it very long. So you have to be able to go to the next one, get connected to the next one and the next one and the next one. So that means that you have to have a flexible morals when it comes to that. So you're not going to be attracted to the person, you're going to be attracted to its position. To its position in the tribe, because then you can just switch to the next person in that position, which is a far more practical way of looking at dating in an unsafe society. So promiscuous, why? Because you have to be able to have sex with any man that fits the description, which is today's dating on Tinder, by the way.
That's another problem.
Right.
Well, okay.
So
you would say that, but so.
By the way, they have smaller babies, but more of them, because then you have a better chance of succeeding.
Okay. So it's maybe a bit of a stupid question, but then
Never is.
would it be possible that, so how does that work then with women who are on the autism spectrum?
Right.
And how was
There's
it work
far
with
less,
men
by the way. Right.
that are on the
That's schizophrenia,
more
right. So that's why we're not going to go men, women, we're going to go paternal, maternal expression. So not men, women, masculine, feminine side. So autism would be an overexpression of the masculine side, schizoid of the feminine side. So there are a few issues with that theory and the way it's expressed. You have to, because for example, in a safe society, you would be in the game would start to change, right? In a safe society where they wouldn't need to be promiscuous on the schizoid side. You would simply need to, because you're going to do more, but you're in a safer, then you would be more attached, for example, to the person rather than the position. Since there's a lesser chance of dying, you're going to have to choose your men better.
Okay.
Right, so then you get attached to the person.
So
one mate for life. If you push that, then you have one mate for life.
So then if you have that specific gene, based on your environment...
We all have that specific gene. It's the expression that matters.
Okay. So would it then be possible that you end up on the schizo or the autism
right.
side
So it's a
based
dial.
on,
So it's a
on
dial.
your environment?
It's a dial. You're gonna to a degree. So you're always gonna be more toward one side or the other because those are your genetics, but your environment will push you even further. So we're not saying that a schizoid could turn into an autistic person.
Okay.
We're saying that an autistic person could go toward ASD. With someone on the spectrum will go toward ASD if the environment were to push that way.
Okay.
Someone that is schizoid could turn schizophrenic, which is not quite the same.
Okay.
It's below schizophrenic.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
In the certain environment. More of that.
Yeah.
You are born within certain characteristics, but they can be pushed forward or less.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now I
Right, so
understand better.
Right. So there's a number of things associated with that idea of schizoid on one time, autism on the other. So what I like about that is it means it indicates both as function.
Yeah,
Right.
I like that a lot too. That
So-
means that there's not that disability factor in it. It's just how
Right,
far
because
in the
schizophrenia is a disability as well, but that's because you take it to a dysfunctional part. Being a schizoid is just being paranoid. But being paranoid is not always a bad thing. Sometimes they are after you. Like if I see that bush moving over there,
Yeah.
well, that's not paranoia. That's probably a bear coming at me 1,000 years ago. But in today's world, if the bush is moving, it's most likely my dog. But that depends on the environment.
Yeah.
1,000 years ago, if you think that's your dog and you're wrong, you die. In today's world, if you think you're wrong, that means it's the gardener and not your dog. So then that's paranoia, to think the bear is coming. So paranoia depends not, that's not exactly what paranoia is, but I'm making it into a fun thing. So because paranoia is not actually the bear coming. Paranoia is that car is white for a reason. It's trying to understand the why things happen.
Yeah, it's also
That's true
giving a
paranoia.
meaning to everything, right?
Right, but that's because you need, and that's what life does, long story, but it's also the same idea of like, I need to know why that bush is moving. Because if I don't, I have a lesser chance of survival. So you have to understand that dose function autism versus schizoid in the imprinted brain theory is based as a learning behavior so that I can survive the world I'm in, which would explain the epigenetic side of things, which is an expression of your environment toward your capacity to learn. So your environment would push a paternal expression or a maternal expression depending on how you would need to learn. Not as an individual as much as a species, because as an individual you're going to be stuck one way or the other, but as a species there's more things to play with because we have to look at nature that way as well. So it's an expression of a learning process. In an unsafe you're going to go maternal, in a safe you're going to go paternal. It's the job of the masculine side to make it safe. It is the job of the maternal side to make it work no matter what. So you could see these arches upon arches upon arches. There's a few problems with the imprinted brain theory that I would like to fix. So the problem is that you're going autism, schizoid as both sides of the arch. Paternal, maternal. We're going to call it masculine, feminine. I would like instead to go schizoid autism, I would like to go prediction observation. That would fix most of the issues of the imprinted brain theory if you were to go at it that way. So basically, it's the imprinted brain theory meets the free energy principle and gets a kid. That kid has the right idea. So that would mean that if we look at the prediction versus observation, which is what all creatures do, this is how we learn. This is called a Bayesian inference model. This is how everything is done. This is how science is done. It's hypothesis, which is a better term than prediction, really. But it's an hypothesis that is formulated versus an observation of the world, where the epigenetic comes from, by the way, in order to see what the somatic error is. And from there, we analyze the somatic error and we try to not repeat it. That's how the whole system works. So that means that you have two systems in place. You have one that is going to drift toward the prediction system, one that is going to drift toward the observation system, which is one is going to favor the hypothesis way of learning. The other one is going to favor the observation way of learning. So I take the hypothesis way of learning. I take that and then I push it. So that means that my conception of the world is first what I think it is. I could easily convince myself, if I were to be inclined to do so, that George V told me to go kill dragons. If I were to go through trauma association, too young for me to remember whatever, that has shaped my hypothesis prediction model, I could come to the conclusion that the feeling that I have that is being associated with a trauma that is being repeated in my everyday life is being framed as George V actually talking to me and telling me to go kill dragons, which would allow me to find the enemy that I need to get rid of the anxiety somatic error that I feel on a daily basis.
All right.
So that would explain why schizophrenic people have actually illusions, audio or video.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Interestingly, the REM sleep, which is healing the mind, helps a lot toward the schizophrenia. So then that goes back to the idea of what dreams are. Remember the REM sleep?
Yeah.
They always formulate as a way for the mind to heal. And if you were not to heal the mind at night, you might want to heal itself during the day by playing through the prediction model, which is just a way to learn about the world.
So stupid question again. So if you have the genes to be more towards the...
No, you always have the genes.
Yeah,
the
okay.
expression
So
of the genes
if-
push
yeah.
you toward, yeah.
Exactly. Towards the more prediction side of things, and you have a certain
Feminine
type
side,
of
yep.
feminine side, you have a certain type of trauma that will be repetitive for someone who's on that side for the rest.
No, for example, if you were to be on that side,
Yeah.
then the trauma will hit you on the prediction side and not on the observation side. So you would have different types to illusions. Like you would be less likely to have illusions on the observation side, but you would repeat certain associated feelings. We're going to get to that when we get to the autism stuff.
Okay.
The problem with texture.
Right. So can it be triggered mostly by trauma, or are there
No,
other-
it's an expression of genes triggered by the environment. Trauma being one of the things in the environment that could trigger certain things. It's, if you want, it's, you have, everybody has that maternal expression of genes, right? In the Imprinted Brain Theory. It's an over-interpretation that takes you over the hump. So everybody's going to be a schizoid to a degree, right? The question is how far do you go? So you can be schizoid, which is really like actually William Reich talked about that a lot. Hemisplided versus schizoid versus multiple personality disorder, but that's another problem. But for him, a schizoid was the correct way to live because he was schizoid himself, very much on the feminine side if you read his books, by the way, where the idea is I am the world is me. That is a prediction-based way of looking at things, which is a feminine way of looking at things. I am the cave, because you're inside the cave. If you're inside the cave is you. Outside the cave doesn't work. Outside the cave is masculine energy.
Exactly.
So that's that
So
inside
he
the
would
cave.
learn through his own experiences.
Oh yeah,
because
he
the
was
world is him.
like if you see the organ energy and everything, it just screams that egotism that he had toward organ energy screams schizoid.
Yeah.
He thought he had figured out the world. That's very,
Yeah.
that's actually paranoia in a way. But yeah, right. So you could see how on the schizoid side, again, if that bush is moving, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
Is that bush is moving, I start to see dragons coming out, I have a problem. Right, but the bush moving in itself is a good thing because you're supposed to go, why is it moving?
Yeah.
So what do you do with that? Back then, if you freak out, that's normal. Now, in today's world, it's less. So it's always within context of the environment. So you're crazy if you're wrong. You're eccentric if you're right.
Right.
Right, so that's why, like schizophrenia,
Back to
right.
the function of things.
Right, it's a function. So the problem with schizophrenia can be to the moment where you're going to start chopping people's head off thinking you're hunting dragons for George V.
Yeah.
then we have a problem in society,
Yeah.
right? But that's when
Then
you
it's
go.
a bit too far.
That's when you go crazy. When you were believing it was fine. When you started acting on it, then that's the overexpression of that gene.
Right.
Right. So now if we go on the other side where you have the paternal overexpression of that gene, you would have people that live within an observation framework. Right. So observation framework would be what? Would be your system, your nervous system in place that is responsible from gathering data from the world so that the hypothesis can be measured against, would be extremely sharp and developed, and in the case of ASD, overactive. So that means, what would it mean? It means that every sound, texture, taste or whatever would be cranked up on steroids to the level 112, constantly.
So you get a lot of information.
A shit ton of too much from your environment in that case, in the sense of because you're being pushed through epigenetics too far toward the paternal expression, too far toward the observational model, your prediction system is weak. So what would you end up? You would end up with a person that finds stimulus from the world to be too much. So for example, you would see in the case of autistic people, not being able to wear certain t-shirts because the contact of the t-shirt on their skin would drive them completely crazy because it's way too much stuff. So that's why you see them sitting always like this toward the ASD because it's less contact with things. The less contact, the less information, the more quiet gets things. I made a podcast where I was explaining like to me, how did it feel for me, the spectrum. Most people are in an open room with open windows and that let the lights and sound in. So the sound in the room and the light in the room is not that bad because there's a connection from the outside. Whereas autistic people, it's a bunker where every sound and light is duplicated. So it allows you to see more of that light and to hear more sounds, but it also gets very, very, very loud most of the time. If it's not the music you want to hear, it can be very overstimulating. Right. So you would see it's an overactive observation system. So that means that it would mean that on one side, the nervous system is supremely developed, very, very sharp. That would be me, right? Very capable of feeling things. So if you see, I cannot create. Why can I not create? Is because my prediction system is not strong. But what I have is a capacity to see patterns. Is my body feels, I know I'm right because I feel it here. Because my nervous system is extremely sharp. My prediction system is not. So I cannot create. I can only see patterns and put them together. That's because
you're extremely good at it. It's very, very impressive.
Right, but I feel patterns. This is the mental palace that I explain all the time. I don't remember things. I just, it's not that. I don't memorize things. I just remember them. So the prediction system allows you more towards story comprehension, which is, so look at it this way. We're going to look at usually what is expressed, the problem with autistic people. You have story comprehension, social cues, right? Understanding one set of emotions, all the stuff that are problematic with autistic people. You see that basically mostly in the default mode network, but that's all the prediction side. Those are all things schizophrenic people will be very good at. Manipulation and all that stuff. That's what they're very good at. Story comprehension. What do you think George V's Hunting Dragon is? Everything is a story. Right, it's a default mode network that is overly active in that sense. Right. This is all that autistic people lack. So they lack the prediction side of things. What they have is an extremely developed nervous system, which means that's why you see the kids doing this or being nonverbal, is because it is too much stimulus from the world.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a hard time, like, okay, I get it,
So for me, autism would be simply an overexpression, if we follow the imprinted brain theory, an expression of the paternal gene toward the observational system, not toward autism. It's just an overly expressed observational model. So there is no autism in that sense, because they put autism on the other side at schizophrenia. But then that's putting it as a disability. Anything pushed forward is a disability. So instead, what we're going to look at it is a prediction versus observation model, which we know exists because that's the Bayesian brain, that's the free energy principle. We know that exists. So instead, you could probably put every personality trait somewhere on that dial.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. It's like, then you can measure every personality trait in that sense.
Right, then you can go into bipolar, you can go into people going back and forth between the two.
Is that possible to have both?
Not at one time.
No, so there's one side takes
Well,
over
again,
one
we're
side.
going functional or dysfunctional.
Right.
What we're talking about having both in that sense is in a dysfunctional way, which means you are taking it too far. So we could see at autism versus schizophrenia in a dysfunctional representation of the model. But just like bipolar is a dysfunctional representation of a normal swings, just like depression is an abnormal representation of sadness. Anxiety is an abnormal representation of excitation. Anything is either functional or dysfunctional. We as humans put words to that. But what if they're all the same? They're all the same dial from prediction to observation. It turns out that if you're too far in a dysfunctional way toward prediction, you are schizophrenic. If you're too far in an observational system, you're autistic. So why does it matter? Well, because we're going to put it into, if that model is correct, we can put it into action, for example, toward training. So if you have a person on the spectrum, that means they are very much on the observation system, but weak on the prediction system. So that means that it will be hard to change their mind. That memorization is going to be a problem, and it's going to be hard to change their mind. That if they want to move a certain way or do certain things, you're going to have a very hard time changing that, which is exactly what you see. Once their mind is set on something, they're extremely stubborn. Right. So because what you need to change is the world, not their mind. You cannot change an autistic person's mind. You can only change the world around them. Because that's the way they deal with somatic error, they change it by changing the world, not by changing the prediction. How do you deal with somatic error? There's 3 ways, but the main 2 ways is changing the prediction or changing the world. The schizophrenic changes the prediction, so they're very good at changing their mind on things, but they suck at action. Whereas on the other side, they're very good at action, but they suck at changing their mind.
Right.
That makes sense?
It makes sense.
So the only way you change their mind is by changing the world. Right. So they have to take an action in order to change the prediction. So that means that's what you would need.
They have to take that action first to be able to change it.
Because they can't change the prediction. So they have to change the world. Their conception of the world from a physical perspective.
Right.
Once you have done that, then the prediction can change. Because you lead through the observational model, whereas schizophrenic, you need to lead through the prediction model. Right. You cannot change the world for a schizophrenic person, it never works. Telling them that the world is not that, it's not that. You have to change the prediction level, which is what pills attack. They attack the conception of the world.
So how would you change the prediction, their way of, how would you handle a schizo person?
That's another podcast. So there are ways, training-wise, but that's going to be. Okay, so let me just finish with autistic stuff, and then we can do a podcast about schizophrenia, because you're asking me how to fix schizophrenia. I'm going to be very rich once I come up with a solution for that one.
Oh,
but,
no, I mean like...
But that's why pills work with schizophrenia. It's because it quiets down the activity of the hypothesis model, the prediction model. Right, but for autistic people, let me finish that. It would mean that, for example, the West scale would work. You would have to go low on the West scale, because if you introduce high complex movement, you're asking for memorization first, and from a mental understanding of a movement, whereas with someone on the spectrum, they can only have a physical understanding of a movement. So they need to do. You can't do a snatch. You have to memorize the step and practice. With a sandbag, you learn as you do it. So the sandbag will always work better. Someone on the schizophrenic side will have to go the other way. Will have memorization, have the steps of a movement and repeat them. They're never going to feel good, but they don't have to. They will memorize the movement and repeat ad nauseum. Whereas but mentally, whereas someone on the spectrum will need to do the movement time and time and time again until they master it, which is what you see me do all the time. Yeah. People understand the amount of work that is there, because I'll take an exercise and I'll do it. I did the oblique opener every day for a year and a half. I did sandbag carries every day for a year and a half. That's what I do. As I learn patterns, I do them. Action, 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 which is what you see with people on the spectrum. They're action-based, because they're not action-based, they're observation-based. It's a sharp nervous system. That's why I suck at memorization. Like I can't remember people's name, but I will always remember how they act.
Or like a movement pattern they have.
I can always remember the movement pattern.
Right shoulder, or left knee, or
because that's a movement pattern. I remember.
Yeah. So what I found out about that for me is, for example, that for me to understand track, I had to quit for a year, because they made me, for example, do technique 5 times a week.
Right.
Because there was so much memorization required, and they asked me to remember the technique, which I couldn't. I could only do. So if I would sprint times 5 times a week, it was no problem. But I would be overstimulated if I would technique.
Right. That's why they think you're a power athlete because you're strong, but they're wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
That was not the problem. The problem is you had to do. So you will learn by doing.
Yeah.
So they would have just left you learn and just, like nudge here and there, but mostly let you get comfortable with the movement. You would have learned the patterns faster than someone else. So they don't understand that, because to other people, they need to be given position. Whereas for an autistic person, it's going to be tension all the way. And within that tension, we will find the right position. You just have to let us go through the stuff. So you could see why autistic people are good at one thing and one thing only. Because how else you're going to be good at that thing? The way to be good at something is by doing it, then we need to do the same thing 12 hours a day, because that's the only way we have to learn. So if you make me do 6 different things, I can't learn. And that's frustrating. And then you're asking me to memorize and change the prediction, which I cannot, because I'm not good at it. So I feel retarded, and I don't like it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you let me do the same thing 12 hours a day, then I'll learn it. And once it's learned forever. Yeah. Because myelization.
I totally see that.
So we learn through myelization, the brain understanding patterns better, especially movement patterns and stuff like that. As our skills are gained. So that means autistic people are skill-based.
Yeah.
So you have to let them learn the skill. So they have to start with a low skill and let them learn that. But if you try to give them a higher skill movement through memorization first, can't work, they'll just get frustrated. We are not good at the prediction level.
Yeah.
Schizophrenic will be the opposite.
Yeah. For me, for example, maybe for people, is Julian explained me 10 times how to do pull-up, right? So the only way I learned to do pull-up was by doing pull-ups for every single day, strict pull-ups for 5 weeks. And then I understood, oh, I have to do pull-up like this.
Right.
And then
which
I could,
said,
and
then you remember that I said it.
And then I remembered, oh, he
because suddenly the world fit the prediction.
Yeah.
So you change the world to fit the prediction.
Yeah. Interesting.
So you could see the feminine energy, right, to go towards schizophrenia, where women need to know everything there is to know before a workout, before the workout.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
Right, that's a prediction system, where men will go, move. That's the observational system. They learn as they go. I always say that men have to fuck up to learn. Observation side, masculine side of things. The overexpression of that is autism.
Okay.
Which would explain, by the way, the world being safer, right? We're pushing toward that. That would explain why you see an explosion of autistic cases in the West. On top of the fact that now we can test more, obviously.
So what do you mean by that? There's an explosion of...
Oh yeah, autistic. So there's a problem with that, is that before we couldn't define autism well, so we have expanded the definition of it because we don't understand it well. And we test more, so naturally the number of cases is going to skyrocket. But even if you take that into consideration, the number of people we see autistic is just so much higher than it was 100 years ago. It's ridiculous. Even when you take into account the fact that we test so much more. In the West. The world is safer.
So as the world is safer, there's more room in that sense for hyper-specialization?
Well, that's what the West is hyper-specialization. If you need a coder, do you know that half the people that work at Google barely finish high school?
Yeah, they're all
fucking autistic kids that can code 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
But who else can code 16 hours a day? Someone who's doing, most people cannot. That's why you see more and more of the autistic people also are being more known because they're becoming successful society-wise at what they do. If you look like and that's why he was the greatest genius ever, but Isaac Newton had to be Isaac Newton to be noticed. He had to change the world forever, the entire world forever to be noticed. Whereas now, you get to see them more often because they're more successful in society, because society has a need for them that wasn't there before. Which is hyper-specialization. Namely towards things that require a lot of repetition. So of course, computer stuff, anything relating to computer is going to be more and more toward. They're going to have an advantage, a tremendous advantage. But you also see far more cases of autism in men than women. So far more, 1 to 4, 1 to 5, even though it's harder to test women. So those numbers you always have to take with a grain of salt.
So I don't know if that's a stupid question or maybe a too complex question, but what is your take on that? So why is it that there are more men that are on the spectrum?
Because there's more men that have masculine energy than have feminine energy, just like there's more women on the feminine side than the masculine side. That doesn't mean that women cannot be on the masculine side. So there are some women that will be autistic, like you, for example, but most of the time you're going to get male energy, masculine paternal expression, whatever you want to call it, on the men's side. Because we have the XY chromosome. So again, the epigenetics will push those forward or not. So, but it's an extremely complex thing because we do not understand the human body. So that's why you're going to see people criticizing the imprinted brain theory, saying it's an hypothesis, it cannot be proven, there's too many holes in there. Of course there's holes in all of this. We do not understand how the human body works. The free energy principle, which is only, 207, so 15 years, is pretty much proving that a unicellular organism, so a cell, has a capacity for mathematical calculation that is far greater than any computer we have today. Try understanding that one. The flatworm thing that I keep talking about, explain to me that one. The science of information, explain to me that one. Paul Davies, Maxwell's demon, go explain to me that one. Like we can't. Because we don't know how. We're all jerking off toward having the iPhone and we went on the moon and all that shit. Like, okay, great. We still don't understand life. What is life? That question asked by Schrödinger in 1942 is still unanswered. Yeah. Especially with the tardigrades and everything. What is life? It gets trickier. What is death? Right. It's not that simple. The tardigrades have proven it. It's not that simple. If the water bear, tardigrades, Google it. That shit is amazing. It's a microorganism that can survive in conditions and lay dormant for years with no activity whatsoever. So technically you would call it death. But then they can be revived and exist again. So they can be put into ridiculous conditions and completely dehydrated. So conditions in which a living organism cannot survive. And it goes dormant, which means it stops any activity, except years later, you unfreeze them. For example, you can freeze them completely at 0 degree temperature. Once you unfreeze them, they go back to life. So define death. So the only reason you say they were not dead is because they came back to life. But if you never revive them, are they dead? Because if you were to revive them, they'd be alive. But if you never revive them, were they dead then? That's a Schrödinger's. So
I don't have an answer to that.
That's a Schrödinger water bear. Because there is no answer. That's the problem with life and death. We are giving, as humans, notions to a world that doesn't have any like that. So it's a vastly complex. So that's the same issue we see with imprinted brain theory, is they're poking holes at stuff with good reasons, but that's not because it's incorrect. It's because we don't understand the human system enough, or actually the life enough to explain, to plug the holes that the theory has.
Yeah. Well, what I'm mostly also thinking about now is like, it would be really weird for nature to put in things like autism or schizophrenic behavior if there was no function to it.
Exactly.
Like it sounds too simple to me to just say that's a mad person. Basically, not to say that.
But that's what they say.
You know what I mean?
Well, that's what they mean. Disability, right? So
there's no right and wrong.
There is, because disability is simple. Is can you function in society? Yeah. If not, it's a disability. Right, but that's why depression, major depression disorder, is the #1 disability in this world. Because in today's society, if you can't work, you're disabled.
Okay, yeah.
So in that sense, can you function in society? So after you can ask me, what does that mean, functioning? Well, can you take care of yourself? Then after that, we can discuss the definition. But the point is that disability starts at when you cannot function in society. Based on criteria that we would have to agree on, by the way. So that's why there is...
Well, that's the thing. It all depends on the criteria.
But it always depends on the criteria. Yeah. So does life. So does everything else. It always depends on criteria. It's just we need language to communicate. So we're going to have to come up with words that will be incorrect in their definition of what we're trying to explain. Yeah. Red.
Right.
How many shades of red are there?
Yeah.
Technically an infinity. So... If you have an
I go to the nail salon and I pick the color
that's not
red,
what I meant, but okay.
there are a lot of colors red.
Right. If you have an infinity of color reds, have you an infinity of color greens? Right. They're both infinite.
Green,
so what is red? Why? Because it's actually different kinds of infinities. Did you know that?
No, I did not. But my mind was not shook enough already by the subject we're talking about. So,
so
thank you for...
There's different types of infinities.
Adding a more piece of information.
Welcome to mathematics. Right, but you still have to call them red because we have to define it. So, but then you get to that moment, it's like, oh, is that red or is that pink? Right, because there's always going to be a shade where you don't have an answer. But overall, we need words. So we're going to go with ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder. Disorder meaning they went too far, now we're in a dysfunctional thing. Obviously, if the kid can't take care of himself, that's a disorder because that's a disability. Now there's always that line where the kid works but not really is a disability. Okay, so there's a gray area right there, but there's 50 shades of observational.
Again, this is of course maybe an oversimplified question, but if you know how a kid is learning, and I'm not saying like really ASD, like not being able to take care of themselves, but someone who's more on the mid of the spectrum, if you know how they learn, maybe you can teach them more skills so they can take care of themselves?
Of course. Which is the whole point of all this. That's what I'm working toward. Right. Is how do you teach autistic kids?
Right.
How do you train them?
Well, that would explain also why those 16-year-olds that work for Google and coding all day didn't finish high school but are able to do.
Because they learn a skill.
Exactly.
But then it means if we're on the observational system, then training is extremely important. It's always important. We imagine how much we can bring to them. They need that as also a form of expression. Right, so that means there's a proper way to train them, and we can do a lot of good through that. Right. That's what I want to do. On this, we'll have more news. Anyway, that's enough mind-blowing for a day. Talk to you guys next week.
My brain is fried.
Exactly.